December 5, 1941. The dawn breaks over the outskirts of Moscow, but the sun does little to pierce the gray, iron sky. The air is sharp with frost, each breath a ghost that hangs and dissipates in seconds. Snow crunches under the boots of the weary Soviet infantry, their uniforms torn and frozen stiff, faces streaked with soot and frostbite. You can almost feel the cold gnawing at their fingers, the wind slicing through their collars like a blade. The German 2nd Panzer Army is advancing, columns of tanks grinding across the white wasteland, engines growling, tracks leaving deep scars in the snow. Artillery shells explode in distant villages, clouds of snow and earth rising in thick plumes. For months, Hitler's blitzkrieg had carved a bloody path across the Soviet Union, crushing cities and morale alike. Moscow was the jewel in his ambition, and it seemed nothing could stop the juggernaut. But in the chaos, a figure stands resolute. Lieutenant General Georgy Zhukov moves among the front lines, assessing positions, his overcoat flapping in the freezing wind, eyes narrowed against the falling snow. Orders are barked, maps unrolled on frozen terrain, radio operators frantically transmitting coordinates. Soldiers glance at him, some trembling not from the cold but from fear. Could anyone really stand against this tide? Zhukov does. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin paces. His breath fogs the air in the dimly lit office, fingers tapping against a desk cluttered with reports and telegrams. Intelligence is grim. Entire divisions had been decimated in the south. German forces were closing in faster than predicted. For days, Stalin feared a retreat would be inevitable, that the very heart of the Soviet Union would fall. His diary entries reveal nights filled with restless calculations, his pen scratching across paper in frantic loops. And then the reports come. Zhukov's counteroffensive has begun. The first probes, small yet decisive, are pushing back against the German advance. Tanks and infantry surge unexpectedly, reclaiming trenches lost only days ago. It's audacious, almost reckless, and yet effective. Stalin reads the dispatches, eyes widening. Could this man, this general, defy the impossible? Could he really hold Moscow? The scene on the front is almost cinematic. Snowflakes fall onto the glinting barrels of Soviet artillery, soldiers gritting teeth and gripping rifles, tanks rumbling forward through drifts that swallow their tracks. The Germans, confident and arrogant, find themselves slowed by ice, mud, and an enemy that refuses to retreat. Every hour the tension escalates. Every hour the question lingers. Will this stand hold, or will it shatter under the weight of the Wehrmacht? Then a single radio crackles in the Kremlin. The words are sparse, clipped. Zhukov reports success at Volokholamsk. Advance halted. Enemy in retreat. Stalin leans closer, disbelief flashing across his face. For the first time in weeks, the fear in his chest loosens, replaced by something heavier, a dawning awe. He begins to realize that Zhukov is not just holding the line, he is turning the tide. And in that realization, a silent question hangs over the Kremlin, chilling in its weight. Can any German general have anticipated this? Could Hitler's plans truly be undone by the sheer audacity of one man? The snow is deeper now, ankle-deep in some places, waist-deep in others. Each step forward is a battle, each breath a small victory against the cold. Zhukov's forces, battered but unbroken, push relentlessly against the German lines. You can hear the thud of artillery and the staccato rattle of machine guns across the frozen forests. Smoke curls from burning Panzer IVs, black against the white horizon, while Soviet T-34s grind forward through icy mud, engines straining but unstoppable. Zhukov walks among his troops, stopping to check a forward trench where soldiers are crouched, faces smeared with snow and grime. "Hold this line," he orders, voice cutting through the wind. There is no hesitation in him, no hint of doubt. Every soldier who looks at him sees the same thing, resolve. The general's eyes are sharp, calculating the enemy's weaknesses even as shells explode nearby. You can almost feel the tension, the tight rope between survival and annihilation. The German commanders, accustomed to blitzkrieg victory, cannot comprehend it. Panzer divisions expecting surrender find Soviet infantry entrenched, artillery firing from concealed positions. snipers picking off officers with chilling precision. Hitler's generals write reports in disbelief. The Soviets do not yield, one scrawls. Their counterattack is unexpected, terrifying, relentless. Back in Moscow, Stalin's eyes never leave the map before him. Red pins mark enemy positions, blue pins mark Zhukov's maneuvers. Each update is met with a tightening of his jaw, followed by a rare, hesitant nod. Diaries later reveal that he felt a combination of relief and awe, his earlier fear giving way to recognition. This is not a defensive action. This is a statement. The weather itself seems to aid Zhukov. Frost and snow hamper German mobility, turning roads into treacherous traps for heavy tanks. But the Soviets, acclimated and disciplined, move with surprising agility. Supply wagons pulled by horses creak under the weight of ammunition. Medics dash across frozen fields to reach the wounded. You can almost hear the crunch of boots and sleds in unison, a rhythm of survival and defiance. And then comes the breakthrough. Soviet infantry, supported by artillery barrages and armored thrusts, reclaim the village of Krasnaya Polyana. German forces falter, disorganized and shocked by the unexpected ferocity. A single German officer's report reads, "It is as if we are ghosts, surrounded by men who will not die, who will not retreat." Stalin, reading this report, leans back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The disbelief is palpable. The man who once feared Moscow's fall now realizes that Zhukov's counteroffensive may be the turning point of the Eastern Front. But even as relief washes over him, there is a lingering tension. How long can this momentum hold? Can Zhukov maintain it against the full might of the Wehrmacht, or will the cold and attrition eventually claim even him? Every night radio operators crackle updates from the front, and Stalin waits, his eyes narrowing on each report. Each victory, no matter how small, strengthens the realization in his mind. Zhukov will not retreat, not now, not ever. The snow is no longer just a backdrop. It is a silent witness to the human cost of Zhukov's relentless drive. Trenches are filled with men shivering in frozen mud, faces pale, lips cracked and bleeding from frostbite. You can almost hear the soft groans of the wounded, the distant shouts of officers trying to rally scattered troops. Yet, despite exhaustion and loss, the Soviet lines do not waver. Zhukov moves among them, inspecting the front under the gray. Leaden sky, his presence a spark of resolve that ignites determination in every soldier. Each counterattack is a gamble. Mortars explode, sending sprays of snow and ice into the air. A German Tiger tank lumbers forward, roaring, only to be disabled by a hidden T-34 ambush. Officers on both sides understand the stakes. For the Soviets, Moscow is not just a city, it is survival itself. For the Germans, capturing it could crush Soviet morale and end the war before winter fully sets in. And yet here in the frozen fields outside the capital, the tide is quietly, dramatically shifting. Stalin is acutely aware of every loss, every heroic stand, every strategic maneuver. His diaries note the nights he lay awake, imagining the frozen soldiers, imagining the snow-draped graves, fearing that Zhukov's audacity might not be enough. But reports keep coming. Villages retaken, supply lines disrupted, German advances stalled. Each dispatch fuels a grudging awe in the Soviet leader, the realization dawning that this is no ordinary defense. This is a transformation, a moment where courage and leadership tip the scales of history. In one small village near Volokholamsk, a platoon fights almost to the last man. They hold a bridge critical to the German advance, the structure battered and smoking. Zhukov personally inspects the position after the skirmish, nodding to his exhausted soldiers. "You have done your duty," he says, voice carrying over the bitter wind. The men, numb from cold and fatigue, understand they are witnessing something larger than themselves, a stand that could decide the fate of their nation. And in the Kremlin, Stalin finally allows himself a measure of hope. The terror of defeat that had gripped him for weeks gives way to admiration and a quiet, almost imperceptible relief. His eyes linger on Zhukov's name, the name of the general who refused to yield. The leader of the Soviet Union realizes with chilling clarity that Moscow may yet survive because one man dared to defy the impossible. But the cost is not lost. Reports of frostbite, hunger, and casualties continue to pour in. Each victory carries a price. Each advance leaves the snow stained with sacrifice. Even as Zhukov's strategy turns the tide, the question lingers. How much can human endurance truly hold against the combined weight of winter, battle, and exhaustion? By mid-December, the battlefield outside Moscow has transformed into a theater of chaos and determination. Smoke curls from shattered German tanks, their blackened hulls jutting from the snow like monuments to hubris. Soviet artillery fires in measured, devastating volleys, each shell a heartbeat pushing back the enemy's advance. You can almost feel the ground tremble under the constant pounding, a rhythmic assertion of defiance against Hitler's once unstoppable machine. Zhukov is everywhere at once, or so it seems. Riding atop a T-34, he surveys the front, eyes scanning frozen forests and crumbling villages, listening to the reports of officers whose voices carry both exhaustion and exhilaration. Every decision is a gamble, every maneuver a calculated risk, but each is executed with precision, transforming Soviet resilience into an offensive that Germans had not anticipated. Panic ripples through enemy units as their advance stalls, then falters, then begins to crumble under coordinated counterattacks. Inside the Kremlin, Stalin watches the updates with a mix of disbelief and cautious hope. The man who had feared the collapse of his capital now witnesses the unexpected. German forces are retreating. His diary captures the shift in his emotions, from apprehension to awe, a reluctant respect for the general who defied logic, strategy, and the harshest winter Moscow had seen in decades. Zhukov's leadership is no longer just a factor. It is the fulcrum upon which the fate of the Eastern Front now balances. The soldiers on the ground feel it too. The morale that had been drained by months of retreat and loss now surges with every captured position, every destroyed enemy vehicle. Tension gives way to confidence, fear to determination. Snow crunches under boots that move with renewed purpose. Machine guns fire with precision rather than desperation. And through it all, Zhukov presses forward, relentless, unyielding, a living embodiment of resistance. But the Germans are not finished. Reinforcements arrive from the rear, tanks and infantry struggling through the snow, desperate to regain lost ground. Orders from Hitler pour down in frantic telegrams: regroup, counterattack, hold Moscow at all costs. The question hangs in the freezing air, heavy with dread and suspense. Can Zhukov maintain momentum, or will the Wehrmacht regroup and reclaim the initiative? Stalin leans closer to the maps, a chill running down his spine not from the cold, but from the realization that he is witnessing something extraordinary. His generals had advised caution, urged defensive strategy, warned of overextension. Yet Zhukov continues daringly, decisively, turning a desperate defense into a counteroffensive that could alter the course of the war. The moment crystallizes in Stalin's mind. This is no ordinary commander. This is a man who will never retreat. And somewhere on the frozen front, a lone soldier glances at the horizon, snow clinging to his uniform, and wonders if history itself is being written beneath his boots. December 17, 1941. Inside the dimly lit Kremlin, the winter sun casts long, pale shadows across the map-strewn table. Stalin sits stiffly, his eyes fixed on the stream of reports arriving from the front. Each report details enemy retreats, Soviet advances, and the extraordinary tenacity of Zhukov's troops. The fear that had haunted him for weeks, the dread of Moscow falling into German hands, begins to dissolve, replaced by a dawning, almost reluctant awe. He leans forward, reading a dispatch describing a counterattack near Volokholamsk. Soviet artillery had obliterated a column of panzer divisions. Infantrymen, some barely able to lift their rifles, pressed forward through chest-deep snow, capturing German trenches and prisoners alike. Stalin's hand, long tense, relaxes slightly on the map. The realization hits him like the winter wind outside. Zhukov will never yield. Not today. Not ever. The diaries later reveal his thoughts. Stalin had always valued cunning and ruthlessness, but what he sees now is different. Raw determination married to tactical brilliance. Zhukov's counteroffensive is not just survival, it is mastery of the battlefield, defiance of expectation, and an unbreakable will that even Hitler's generals could not anticipate. Stalin recognizes that this is a turning point, not only for Moscow but for the morale of the entire Soviet Union. Across the front, soldiers feel the shift too. Morale surges like electricity through frozen trenches. Commanders relay Zhukov's orders with renewed vigor. Tanks push past obstacles with audacious precision, and the German advance falters under the weight of unyielding opposition. You can almost hear the collective heartbeat of an army reclaiming its courage, every step forward echoing through the snow-laden landscape. And yet the tension remains. Stalin knows the cost, the frostbite, the exhaustion, the countless lives lost in these bitter weeks. But the fear that had once gripped him has been replaced by a single, undeniable truth. Moscow will not fall, and the man responsible stands firm in the cold, unshaken, relentless. In that moment, the leader of the Soviet Union finally understands. History is being shaped not only by armies and equipment, but by the indomitable will of one man, whose refusal to retreat will forever alter the fate of a nation. The question now lingers in Stalin's mind, unspoken yet urgent. Can Zhukov keep this momentum, or will the harsh Russian winter and the relentless enemy test even his legendary resolve? By late December, the snow-covered fields outside Moscow have become a battlefield alive with movement and strategy. Zhukov's forces, once holding on by a thread, now push the Germans steadily back. T-34s barrel through icy roads, their engines groaning under the strain, while Soviet infantry advances through dense woods, firing in coordinated volleys that slow and scatter panzer divisions. Smoke rises from destroyed vehicles, curling into the gray sky like dark flags of defiance. Zhukov moves from position to position, inspecting the front with an unflinching gaze. A lieutenant reports a stalled advance. Zhukov doesn't hesitate. Reorganize, artillery on the left, push forward at dawn, he commands. His voice is calm, unshakable, a lighthouse in the storm of war. Soldiers see him and feel a renewed sense of purpose. The rumor spreads along the front lines. The man who will never retreat is leading them. German commanders are reeling. Their carefully planned offensive, designed to crush Moscow before winter fully sets in, is disintegrating under Zhukov's relentless counterattacks. Confusion spreads through their ranks. Some units pull back in disorder, others are encircled and captured. Reports reach Berlin. Soviets counterattack with vigor unmatched. Moscow is no longer vulnerable. Even seasoned generals struggle to understand how a force that had been on the brink of collapse is now dictating the battlefield. In the Kremlin, Stalin studies the maps again, tracing the blue arrows of Zhukov's maneuvering. His usual composure is punctuated by the occasional nod of disbelief. The diary entries from this period reflect a mixture of relief and awe. The dread that had haunted him is replaced by the certainty that Zhukov's leadership has changed the trajectory of the war. And yet victory is not complete. Supplies are thin, troops are exhausted, and the winter bites with lethal insistence. Each step forward is earned through courage, ingenuity, and sheer will. But the tide has turned. Where retreat and fear once dominated, now determination and momentum surge like a river breaking free of ice. Stalin, finally, allows himself a rare, almost private smile. He understands what everyone in the Soviet Union will soon realize. Zhukov's counteroffensive is more than a military maneuver. It is a symbol, a statement, and the spark that will light the path to Moscow's salvation. But even in this triumph, a question lingers, sharp and cold as the wind. Can the Soviets sustain this momentum? Or is the winter still waiting to test their resolve in ways no general can anticipate? December 18, 1941. Dawn breaks over Volokholamsk. a small town whose streets are now scarred with craters and the frozen remnants of battle. The wind whistles through shattered rooftops, carrying the acrid scent of smoke and gunpowder. German forces, exhausted and disoriented, attempt to regroup for a counterstrike, but every move is anticipated, every approach met with prepared defenses. Zhukov himself rides along the front in an open command vehicle, eyes scanning the icy horizon. Snow clings to his coat, wind biting at his face, yet he moves with the unshakable confidence of a man who knows the battlefield as an extension of his own mind. Officers deliver reports of captured prisoners, destroyed tanks, and regained positions. Zhukov nods, issuing rapid-fire orders. Artillery focus on the southern approach. Infantry reinforces the western flank. Push through the village at first light. Soldiers under his command begin to sense a larger rhythm, a pattern of inevitability. The Germans, once relentless and confident, are faltering. A young corporal writes later in his diary, "We had believed Moscow would fall, that retreat was inevitable. Yet now, under Zhukov, we felt like the storm itself." Each captured position is more than strategic, it is psychological, a blow to the German morale and a lifeline to the Soviet heart. Back in the Kremlin, Stalin pores over the reports with unusual intensity. The fear that had clawed at him for weeks is now replaced by a stark, off-field recognition. Zhukov's counteroffensive is no longer merely defensive, it is a decisive pivot. Stalin writes in his diary, "Comrade Zhukov does not retreat. He does not hesitate. The Germans, for the first time, face a Soviet army that strikes with purpose, unyielding in the face of winter and fire." But the battle is far from over. Volokholamsk remains contested, streets still littered with rubble, the air heavy with smoke and tension. Every hour carries the potential for catastrophe or triumph. Zhukov's strategy is audacious, perhaps dangerously so, yet the results are undeniable. Moscow's defenders have seized the initiative, and the perception of Soviet weakness is shattered before the eyes of the invaders. As night falls over the snow-drenched town, German commanders huddle in cold, makeshift shelters, reports of retreating units trickling in. They mutter disbelief at what they cannot understand. A Soviet army, battered and frozen, pressing forward with lethal precision. And somewhere in the still-lit rooms of the Kremlin, Stalin allows himself the full weight of realization. The city will survive not merely by luck, but because one man refused to retreat. The question now looms over the Eastern Front like the winter sky itself. How far will Zhukov's audacity carry Moscow? How close is the line between salvation and disaster? December 19, 1941. Moscow is cloaked in frost and tension. From the Kremlin, Stalin peers through the frost-lined windows, watching distant columns of Soviet troops advancing steadily, pushing German forces back across the snow-choked roads. Smoke rises in thin, gray wisps from the recaptured villages, curling into the sky like signals of defiance. Each report that reaches him feels heavier than the last, but in a strange, exhilarating way, the weight of proof that Zhukov's plan is succeeding. Stalin leans over the maps, fingers tracing the blue lines representing Soviet counterattacks, red marks of German positions. Each movement, each push forward, reveals the genius and sheer nerve of the general commanding these operations. Zhukov is not just holding ground, he is dictating the battlefield, turning panic into organized resistance and chaos into opportunity. Stalin's heart pounds with a mixture of fear and admiration. Fear that Moscow could still fall if Zhukov falters. Admiration for a man whose will has become as unyielding as the frozen earth itself. At the front, Zhukov rides along the roads near Mazhaysk. Snow sticks to the barrels of artillery, to the tracks of tanks, to the boots of infantry soldiers trudging through ankle-deep drifts. The wind bites and frost creeps under coats, yet no one hesitates. Every officer, every soldier understands that this is more than orders. It is a commandment of resolve, a lesson in courage. The Germans stumble over the snow, slowed by overconfidence and the harsh winter, while Soviet forces exploit every weakness with deadly precision. Stalin reflects on the intelligence reports an officer dispatches with something approaching awe. The same reports that once filled him with dread now instill quiet reverence. The diaries capture it. Zhukov does not retreat. He moves, he strikes, and the enemy falters before him. Perhaps no one could have anticipated such courage, such clarity in the storm of battle. But even as awe settles over the Kremlin, the war is far from over. Casualties mount, supply lines strain, and the cold remains an ever-present adversary. Zhukov's audacity is unbroken, but every step forward is paid for in blood and exhaustion. Soldiers collapse beside captured positions, medics rush to tend frostbite and wounds, and the bitter wind whistles like a reminder of the stakes. And yet Moscow breathes a little easier. Stalin's realization deepens. The city's survival, and perhaps the fate of the Soviet Union, rests in the hands of one man whose refusal to retreat has transformed fear into hope. But the question still lingers, sharp as the winter air. How far can one man's courage carry an entire army against the might of Hitler's forces? Can audacity alone bend the course of history? December 20th, 1941. The first light of dawn glints off the icy rooftops of Moscow, illuminating a city that is held, against all odds, against the crushing advance of the Wehrmacht. From his office in the Kremlin, Stalin watches the snow-streaked reports arrive, detailing Soviet gains, German retreats, and the tenacity of a general who refuses to yield. He leans forward, breath fogging the cold window panes, heart pounding, not with fear but with dawning realization. Zhukov's counteroffensive has transformed the battlefield. Soviet troops push through exhausted German lines, reclaiming villages one by one. T-34s plow through drifts of snow, their engines groaning under the strain, while artillery pounds enemy positions with devastating accuracy. Officers shout orders, runners dash through the frozen chaos, and soldiers press forward, knowing that retreat is not an option. You can almost hear the rhythm of determination, the pulse of an army rising from despair. Stalin, once consumed with dread, now feels awe. His diaries note the shift. The Germans believed they would take Moscow. Our lines were thin, our losses great. Yet Zhukov moves as if the winter itself obeys him. The enemy falters where he strikes. He does not retreat, he does not hesitate. Perhaps he is the army itself, incarnate. The fear that had gripped him for weeks melts into an understanding of something greater. Leadership, courage, and willpower can shape destiny, even against overwhelming odds. At the front, the soldiers sense it too. Morale surges as German units falter and retreat. A lieutenant later writes, "We followed Zhukov not because we were ordered, but because we knew he would never abandon us. We marched into snow and fire and believed in victory." Each advance, each captured position, reinforces the idea that Moscow's fate has shifted. The tide has turned. But even in this moment of awe, Stalin knows the war is far from over. The Wehrmacht remains a deadly force, and the winter's bite is merciless. The question lingers in the cold Kremlin air. Can this momentum be sustained? Can one man's unyielding will carry an entire nation through the storm that still looms over Europe? As the sun rises higher, glinting off the frost-laden streets, Stalin closes his eyes for a moment, a single thought echoing in his mind. Zhukov will never retreat. And in that truth, hope begins to burn. December 21st, 1941. The city of Moscow is silent except for the distant thrum of artillery and the crunch of boots over snow. Streets once feared lost are now fortified, barricaded with sandbags, and defended by men whose resolve has hardened into steel. Smoke rises from the outskirts where German tanks lie abandoned, engines cold, their crews captured or fleeing in confusion. The frost glistens on broken rifles and the edges of frozen trenches, a harsh testament to the cost of survival. Zhukov rides along the newly secured positions, his presence steadying the soldiers who have endured weeks of hardship. He stops at a forward trench, inspecting the men crouched against the icy wind. "We hold Moscow," he says simply, his words slicing through the cold. Around him, the soldiers nod, exhaustion etched into every line of their faces but pride shining through their eyes. They have fought against the impossible, and for now, the city is safe. In the Kremlin, Stalin paces slowly, the weight of realization settling over him like the winter's snow. Reports flood in of German retreats, captured equipment, and prisoners. The diaries reflect his awe and relief. Zhukov does not retreat. Moscow stands because of him. The enemy has underestimated the courage of our people and the brilliance of this man. History will remember this moment. He pauses, imagining the soldiers on the front lines, the frozen fields where courage and desperation collide, and understands the scale of what has been achieved. The tide of battle has shifted. Where fear and despair once dominated the minds of the Soviet leadership, determination and awe now take hold. The unthinkable has happened. Hitler's advance has been stopped, the capital secured, and a general's unyielding will has inspired a nation to endure and resist. But even as relief floods the Kremlin, the war marches on. Supplies are strained, winter remains merciless, and the Wehrmacht is regrouping to strike again. Yet Stalin knows a truth that cannot be denied. The moment Zhukov refused to retreat, Moscow found its salvation. That act of courage, defiance, and strategy will echo through the annals of history, a turning point in a war that seemed unstoppable. For now the city breathes, the soldiers rest, the artillery quiets, and Stalin allows himself a moment of reflection. One man's refusal to yield has not only held Moscow, it has ignited hope for the entire Soviet Union.